Hello guys, welcome, and now we are going to see the Queen's Gambit model game, and, uh, and it's played between Kasparov as white and Yuri Averbakh as black in 1982. The game goes d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and knight f3, and d5, knight c3, c6, and bishop g5, knight bd7, e3, queen a5, knight d2, bishop b4. It's the Cambridge Springs, and queen c2, d takes c4. Black trades voluntarily on c4 because white has to renounce the bishop pair to recover the pawn. And after bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, and knight takes c4, queen c7. Still it seems difficult for black to open up this position. In what follows, white spends a lot of time locking up the pawn structure, placing his pawns on dark squares in order to make his own bishop better and mitigate the effect of black's two bishops. a3, bishop e7, g3. White has performed an advantageous transition to a Catalan structure, which isn't treated in this book. In this structure, white never minds trading his dark squared bishop uh, in exchange for a knight. As long as black isn't able to free himself through c5, white usually has a small edge. Castles, and if at all black tries c5, a thematic break, then bishop g2, bishop d7, and knight e5, cd4, ed4, and a position with an isolated pawn in which white has active pieces. But black goes castles and bishop g2, bishop d7. This is somewhat passive. It was highly timed to push c5, for which black won't get another chance soon due to white's next b4. And after this, c5 is off the cards, and b6 and castles, and rook a c8. Black now had a way of trying to free his game with a5. White's best response would have been knight e5. If at all black pushed a5, white's best response would be knight e5. After a b4 and a b4, and now bishop takes b4 can be answered with knight b5, queen b7, and then bishop takes c6. And not only has white one his pawn back, but also he will eliminate black's bishop pair. Black plays rook a c8, rook f c1, rook f d8, rook a b1, bishop e8, and knight e4, and knight d5, and knight e5, queen b8, queen a2, queen a8. Black puts his queen on that line of fire of the bishop g2, where it looks odd despite the intention of opening the a file. Queen b3, a6, Then rook b2, a5, knight d3, ab4, ab4, rook c7, knight d2, rook a7, and knight c4, rook here a1. The logical culmination of black's play since move 20 using the a file and trading pieces. After rook takes a1, queen takes a1, rook b1, queen a6, and knight ce5, rook a8, rook c1, queen b5, queen c2, rook c8. Black can't touch the b4 pawn, since after knight takes b4, there is knight takes b4, and after queen takes b4, after queen takes b4, after there is bishop takes c6, the immediate tactics don't achieve anything, as white can unravel rook c8 and queen d1, bishop d6, and rook b1, and queen c3, and rook b3, queen a5, and bishop takes e8, rook takes e8, and knight c4, and white has a large advantage here. So the pawn b4 pawn cannot be touched, and after rook c8, rook a1, bishop d6, rook a7. The correct continuation here was knight c4, making the most out of white's space advantage. Here white loses his control. Then bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes b4, queen e4, knight d5, and bishop f1, queen b3, queen f3, knight f6, and bishop a6, and queen b1, check, and king g2, rook d8, and knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, queen takes c6, queen e4, check, black takes his refuge in an endgame with one pawn down, but due to the presence of a knight versus a bishop, the arising endgame is hard to defend, even with all pawns on both colors so close together. And now after queen takes e4, knight takes e4, rook b7, g5, rook takes b6. White has now reached a very favorable endgame. King g7, bishop e2, knight f6, rook b5, h6, h4, rook d5, rook c5, gh4, gh4 and rook d7, bishop f3, rook a7, rook c2, rook e7, bishop c6, and then rook a7, king f3, rook a5, rook c3, rook f5 check, and then king g3, rook rook a5, and then f4, and then knight d5, and then after bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, rook c5, rook d6, and f5, knight king f6, king f4, and rook d8, rook c4, rook d7, e4, ef5, and e5 check, king e6, h5, king d5, rook a4, rook d8, king takes f5, rook g8, king f6, and rook g5, and there is e6, and fe6, and rook a5 check, king takes d4, rook takes g5, h takes g5, and h6, and Kasparov wins at the last. And I hope you would have enjoyed the game, guys. I will meet you in the next game. Thank you all.